What would you do if a wounded stray dog showed up at the police station carrying a missing child on his back and refused to rest until he led officers to something far more terrifying? It was a stormy Thursday evening in Oak Ridge, the kind where the rain feels heavier than it should and the wind howls like it knows a secret you don't. Inside the police station, the fluorescent lights buzzed above empty desks, half-filled coffee cups, and tired officers finishing paperwork no one really wanted to do. Everything was ordinary until the doors flew open like they'd been kicked by fate itself. A German shepherd, mud-caked, soaked in blood, panting like he'd outrun hell, stumbled in and collapsed right there on the linoleum floor, tied to his back with torn strips of cloth. Was a little girl. Limp, motionless, her face pale, her hair matted with blood and dirt. "Jesus Christ," Officer Ethan Cole whispered, already sprinting toward them. The dog, though barely breathing, let out a low, wounded snarl, still guarding her, even in collapse. Captain Daniel Reeve rose from his desk slowly, his face gone pale. "That's Jack Callahan's girl," he said hoarsely. "Emily, 8 years old. Been missing 72 hours. "And the dog?" Ethan asked as paramedics rushed in, cutting Emily free. Reeve didn't hesitate. "That's Shadow." The room froze. Time slowed. Even as EMTs worked to stabilize Emily, Shadow's amber eyes never left her face. Not even when blood pooled beneath his pores. Not even as his breathing turned ragged. Not even after 3 tranquilizer darts had failed to bring him down 3 days ago. Somehow, this battered old dog had brought her home. Alone, and it wasn't over. As they loaded Emily onto a stretcher, the front door opened again. A tall woman stepped inside, shaking rain from her FBI windbreaker. Her dark hair clung to her cheeks, and her badge glinted beneath her coat. Agent Grace Howard. She took one look at the dog, the girl, the blood, then she whispered, "He's trying to tell us something." And in that moment, Shadow did the unthinkable. He stood up. His legs trembled, his ribs heaved with every breath, but he turned toward the door, looked back once at the officers with eyes that were unmistakable, even to skeptics. "Follow me." He didn't bark. He didn't whine. He just walked out into the rain, and every soul in that room, officers, EMTs, FBI, followed. 3 years earlier, Shadow had been just another unwanted dog in a shelter. Grizzled, scarred, silent, a German shepherd with a notch in one ear and eyes like he'd seen war. They said he was 5, but he looked older, like he'd survived things you couldn't put in a file. Jack Callahan hadn't wanted him. After all, Jack didn't want anything anymore. He was a former Marine turned general contractor. But after his wife Rachel was murdered in their own home, Jack drowned in grief. He traded war medals for whiskey. He shut the world out, including his own daughter Emily. He didn't want a dog. But Emily did. She'd walked past every bouncing puppy, every lapdog, and knelt in front of Shadow like she already knew him. "This one," she said softly. His eyes are sad like mine. So they brought him home. At first, Jack avoided them both. Shadow was a reminder of Rachel. The dog had been hers, the only one who'd tried to protect her the night she died. Jack couldn't forgive that failure, not in the dog, and not in himself. 1 week later, in a fit of blind rage, Jack returned Shadow to the shelter. Emily brought him back. Shadow never left again. Over time, they became inseparable. Emily whispered her secrets to him at night. She brushed the dust from his coat and told him stories under the covers. And when nightmares came, screaming memories of her mother's death, Shadow would curl beside her bed and stay until the sun rose. Jack noticed. Of course he did. But he stayed distant. Grief makes cowards of strong men. Still, Shadow waited. Loyal, patient, And when Emily disappeared from school 3 days ago, taken by someone pretending to be her father. Shadow had known something was wrong long before anyone else did. That night, he'd barked until his throat went raw. He tried to dig under doors, jump through windows, claw his way out of the house. Jack thought the dog had lost it. Locked him in the laundry room. He was wrong. When Jack opened the door hours later, Shadow didn't bolt toward food or water. He didn't whimper or lick his wounds. He went straight to the study, Rachel's old office, a room Jack hadn't touched since the funeral. The dog clawed at the door, whining, pawing, like there was something inside the walls themselves. Jack yelled, shoved him away, knocked over a bottle of whiskey, but when he met those amber eyes, there was no fear. No defiance, just disappointment. Then the phone rang. "Mr. Callahan," Agent Grace Howard said, "we found Emily's backpack near Miller's Creek." And signs of a struggle. Jack turned back to the dog. The front door was open. Shadow was gone. By dawn, the battered shepherd had covered over 15 miles, torn paws, broken ribs. Determined heart, he sniffed through creeks and briar thickets, following trails only he could sense. He ignored hunger, cold and pain. Locals called the place he ended up Devil's Backbone, a mess of abandoned mining tunnels and ghost stories. Shadow didn't care about the stories. He found her, hidden beneath logs and brush inside a steel bunker. Emily, alive. Crying, terrified, he couldn't reach her, but he pressed his nose through a crack in the door. She whispered, "I knew you'd find me." And now he was back, standing in the storm, bleeding. But not done yet. The girl was safe for now. But something worse was coming. And Shadow knew they needed to follow him. 3 years before a bloody dog walked into the Oak Ridge Police Department with a child strapped to his back, Jack Callahan stood in front of a wire kennel in a dingy animal shelter and said 6 words that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "I don't want the damn dog." The kennel rattled as a grizzled German shepherd looked up, not with hope, he'd already learned not to hope, but with tired, hollow eyes. A notch in his ear, old battle scars across his flank, and the kind of stillness that doesn't come from obedience, but from having seen too much. "They say he's 5, the shelter worker said gently, "but we think he's older." "War vet's dog, maybe. Got brought in after some incident." Jack grunted, not really listening. He wasn't there by choice. It was his daughter, Emily, who had dragged him through the rain that afternoon, skipping past the yapping puppies and fluffy lapdogs until she found him, this silent soldier of a dog sitting alone like a ghost in a cage. She didn't hesitate. She knelt down, placed her tiny hand against the wire, and whispered, "This one." His eyes are sad like mine. Jack had wanted to scream. He didn't have space in his chest for anyone else's sadness. His was already too loud. But he said nothing. Because since his wife Rachel was murdered in their own home 9 months prior, Jack had lost the strength to argue about anything. Rachel Callahan had been everything Jack wasn't. A journalist, smart, relentless. Soft-spoken but sharp as a razor when it mattered. She lit up any room she walked into, and she never backed down from a truth, no matter how ugly it was. And she loved him. Even after the war, even after the drinking started, she loved Emily even more. And when she died killed in their kitchen by someone who was never caught, Jack lost the 2 things that had tethered him to the world, purpose and peace. He buried Rachel in the spring. By summer, he had buried himself in whiskey and silence. When Emily brought Shadow home, she treated him like an old friend returning from war. She brushed the dirt off his fur. She talked to him like he understood every word. At night, he lay curled at the foot of her bed like a sentry. "Mom would have loved him," she said one night, stroking the dog's head. Jack had been standing in the hallway, listening. He didn't step inside. He couldn't, Because Shadow wasn't just a dog. He was a reminder. You see, Shadow had been Rachel's, not officially. But during the last few weeks before her death, Rachel had begun volunteering at the same shelter. One day, she came home with blood on her blouse and a fire in her eyes. He tried to protect a girl, she'd said. Took a blade across the ribs. They dumped him like trash after that. I want to foster him. Jack had said no. Too much noise, too much responsibility, too much pain. So Rachel visited Shadow every day instead, brought him treats, talked to him like she talked to their daughter. Smiled more than she had in months. Then she died. And Shadow disappeared. No one knew where he went after that night. Not until Emily found him again, months later still at the same shelter, renamed, unclaimed, unwanted. The only survivor of the night Rachel was killed. When Jack saw him again, standing in their hallway, tail wagging low and uncertain, the rage surged up like a wave. "You were there," he snapped. "You were there, and you didn't stop it." Shadow didn't move. Didn't growl, didn't blink, just stood there. Like he agreed, like he carried the same guilt. Jack threw him out that night. Emily refused to speak to her father for 2 straight days. When Jack finally sobered up enough to notice, he found her sitting on the front porch, rain dripping from her hair, Shadow curled beside her like a statue. She looked up at Jack not with anger, but disappointment far too old for her age, and said, "He tried. He's just like you." Jack almost laughed. Almost. Instead, he turned around and walked inside. 5 minutes later, the door opened again. Shadow padded in. And from that day forward, he stayed. They didn't heal overnight, of course not. Some wounds don't close. They just learned to coexist with your heartbeat. But slowly, quietly, something began to change. Jack would catch glimpses of Emily giggling into Shadow's fur. He'd find the dog waiting at the front door at exactly 2:57 p.m., 3 minutes before the school bell every single day. He'd hear the soft thud of paws in the hallway when Emily cried out in her sleep, and the way Shadow would nuzzle her until she calmed. And when Jack passed out drunk on the couch, it was Shadow who stayed by his feet, watching. Not judging, just watching. One night, Jack opened his late wife's office. Dust clung to the corners, her books still on the shelves, her coffee mug still on the desk. Shadow walked in and sat down, right beside the desk, like he'd been waiting for Jack to do that all along. That's when Jack started taking longer walks, started drinking a little less, started showing up a little more. And then came Tuesday, the day everything fell apart again. The day Jack dropped Emily off at school with a rushed kiss and a tired promise. "See you at 3. The day the front office told him someone else had picked her up for a family emergency. The day he realized no one else was supposed to. The day Shadow began pacing back and forth, barking, growling, scratching the back door, frantic. The day Jack made the second biggest mistake of his life. He locked the dog in the laundry room. That night, Shadow howled so loud, the neighbors called to complain. But Jack didn't listen. He didn't want to believe that something deep inside a dog could know what humans didn't. He didn't understand, not yet, but Shadow did. Because 3 days later, when he came limping into the police station with Emily tied to his back, Jack would finally understand what Rachel had always known. That sometimes, the ones we cast aside are the only ones still fighting for us. Tuesday started like any other. Jack Callahan burned the toast, spilled coffee on his flannel, and tied Emily's shoelaces too tight. She didn't complain. She never did, not since Rachel died. She just smiled and said, "You'll get better, Daddy. We're still practicing." Shadow sat by the door, tail wagging slow and steady, watching their rushed morning routine like it was part of his job, which in a way it was. He always saw them off. Always waited by the door when they came back. Jack ruffled Emily's hair and kissed her forehead. 3 o'clock, Same as always, he said. Emily climbed into the truck. Shadow jumped into the back without being told. The sun peeked out from behind the fog as they drove to school. Emily waved goodbye at the curb. Shadow's ears perked up when she blew him a kiss. She loves that dog more than anything, her teacher, Miss Thelma, would later say. She doesn't trust people much, but Shadow, he's her world. At 3:15 p.m., Jack pulled up to the school. The playground was empty. The front office was confused. Oh, Miss Callahan, she was picked up earlier. A family emergency, I think. Wasn't that you? Jack felt the ground shift beneath him. No, he said slowly. No one else is supposed to pick her up. No one. By 4 p.m., the Oak Ridge Police Department had a search team out. By 6, the FBI was involved. By 8, the forest behind the school had been combed 3 times. And by 10, Jack Callahan was unraveling, wet, cold, and cursing the sky like it had personally betrayed him. Back home, Shadow was pacing. He circled the living room, growling low, then rushed to the door. He barked loud, sharp, insistent. When Jack ignored him, he ran to the back window, pawed at the glass, looked at Jack, then barked again. He's picking up on something, Agent Grace Howard said that night as she reviewed the preliminary findings. Could be, replied Captain Daniel Reeve, arms crossed, jaw tight. But we've got trained canine units already. We don't need a house pet with PTSD. He's not just a pet, Grace muttered. He's family. But no one listened. Especially not Jack. Shadow lunged at the door again, barking like his chest would burst. Shut up, Jack snapped. Get it together. Shadow froze, then very slowly he walked into the laundry room. Jack closed the door behind him. That night, Shadow howled. It wasn't a dog sound, it was deeper than that. It was grief, rage, knowing, and Jack tried not to hear it. He sat in the kitchen, drinking. The leash hung from a hook near the back door, swaying slightly every time the dog howled. At 12:47 a.m., Jack finally opened the laundry room door. He expected the dog to lunge out, but Shadow didn't move. He just stood, eyes locked on Jack's face, and walked calmly, purposefully, into Rachel's office. The door had remained shut since the funeral. Now, Shadow pawed at it, whined once, then sat down. Jack's temper boiled over. What is wrong with you? He shouted. You think she's in there? Is that it? In his frustration, Jack knocked over a bottle of whiskey on the floor. The scent filled the room like poison. Shadow backed up slowly, ears low, but he didn't look away. There was no aggression in him, just sorrow and disappointment. And something else. Urgency. Then the phone rang. It was Grace Howard. Jack, she said, we found Emily's backpack. Jack froze. Where? Miller's Creek. There are signs of a struggle. His heart dropped. When he turned back toward the living room, the front door was wide open. Shadow was gone. What no one knew, not yet, was what happened between the moment Emily waved goodbye at school and the moment Shadow disappeared into the night. Emily had been called to the front office around 2:00 p.m. A family emergency, the receptionist had said, handing her a note scribbled with her father's name. A man was waiting in the parking lot. He wore a ball cap, a clean flannel. He smiled and waved at the front desk. No one asked questions. Emily, holding her lunchbox, didn't speak until they passed the town limit sign. Where's Shadow? She asked quietly. The man kept driving. That evening, back at the Callahan house, Jack stood alone on the porch, leash still in hand, wind blowing through his shirt like the world had gone hollow. He didn't know what to do, didn't know what to feel. His daughter was missing. His wife was dead, and now the dog was gone too. It wasn't until the next morning that Jack noticed something. In the corner of the study, the one room he had sealed off from the world, was Rachel's old field recorder. Its red light blinked. Shadow had pawed at that spot the night before. as if he knew. Somewhere deep in the forest, Shadow limped through brambles, scent in his nose, memories behind his eyes. He remembered the night Rachel screamed. He remembered the cologne. He remembered the sound of her body hitting the floor. And now, he smelled that scent again. In the trees, in the wind, and he knew. They had her, and he was going to get her back. By dawn, Shadow had already traveled nearly 15 miles. His paws were shredded, his ribs ached with every breath, blood mixed with mud on his flanks as he limped across creeks, under barbed wire fences, through thorn-covered hills and forgotten trails. He moved like a ghost, silent, determined, driven by a scent only he could follow. The scent of Emily, the scent of danger. And something worse, something from long ago. That same chemical cologne. The one that had clung to the walls of the Callahan home the night Rachel died. Shadow hadn't forgotten. He couldn't. Some memories don't fade. They burn. Locals called the place Devil's Backbone, a stretch of land most kids were warned to stay away from. Old mining shafts from a century ago. Collapsed tunnels, sinkholes, and the ruins of structures long reclaimed by the woods. There were stories of people disappearing. Strange noises at night, dogs that went in and never came out. But Shadow didn't care about stories. He followed truth, and it led him there. Tucked beneath a tangle of moss, brush, and fallen branches, Shadow found it. A steel bunker hidden beneath the forest floor. Rusted, bolted, camouflaged. And inside, Emily. He could smell her fear, her blood, her tears. But also, her hope. He circled the structure, his paws scraping the concrete edges until he found a tiny gap beneath a heavy metal door, just wide enough for his muzzle. He pressed his nose through, and from inside, a small, trembling voice whispered, "Shadow?" Emily had known he would come. She didn't know how. She just knew. Even when the bad men took her phone, her shoes, her backpack, even when they threw her into the darkness and told her to be quiet, or else. She'd curled up in the corner and closed her eyes, imagining his fur beneath her hands, his warm breath on her neck. "You found me," she whispered through the metal crack. Shadow didn't bark. He didn't move. He just breathed. So she talked about what she saw, what she heard. The voice of the man who took her. The same one who used to visit her house when Mommy was working on her big story. The smell of him. The plan to move her at midnight. Shadow growled low, a sound meant for no one but the ghosts. Then he vanished. Emily pressed her face to the gap. "Shadow?" No answer. Just silence. Then, the sound of claws on metal above her. The ventilation shaft was barely wider than Shadow's body. Sharp edges sliced at his skin. Rusted bolts tore through fur and flesh. But he kept moving, crawling, pushing, one paw at a time. Somewhere down the hall a guard muttered, "Whitmore wants her gone by midnight." Shadow paused. Charles Whitmore, he knew that name. He knew that scent. He knew that evil. He crawled further until he could see through the slats of the vent into the hallway below. Two men. One pacing, one holding a clipboard. "Package goes out tonight," one said. "Truck's coming at 11 sharp." Shadow backed up slowly, turned around, and retraced his path. Time was running out. Back in town, Agent Grace Howard stared at a blinking dot on her laptop screen, a signal from Shadow's microchip. It was pinging from deep inside Devil's Backbone. She hadn't told anyone she'd activated it, not even Jack. When she saw the location, her breath caught. He found her. Inside the bunker, Emily stayed curled near the door. She couldn't sleep. Couldn't cry, could barely breathe. But when she heard the metal groan, her eyes widened. Footsteps, a key turning, she froze. A guard entered, carrying a metal tray. Dinner time, princess, he sneered. He didn't see the blur in the shadows until it was too late. Shadow struck like a missile, teeth first. He launched from behind a stack of crates, jaws clamping down on the man's forearm. The tray crashed to the floor, food spilled across the concrete. The man screamed, his hand reaching for the pistol on his belt. Shadow didn't let go. He'd been trained for this, by Rachel. By instinct, by grief. He drove the man into the wall, snarling. More shouts echoed down the corridor. Another door opened somewhere. Emily saw her chance. She ran. She didn't know where to go, didn't know what direction led to freedom. But she remembered a room from her first day in the bunker, a storage room with a high window. Shadow had followed her then. He followed her now. They found the room. The window was almost 6 feet off the ground. Emily looked at Shadow. "You want me to climb on you?" He crouched low, perfectly still. She scrambled onto his back. Slipped, tried again, caught the ledge. The latch groaned as she twisted it. The window opened. Fresh air rushed in. She squeezed through, fell into the tall grass outside. "Shadow, come on!" she cried. But the shepherd didn't follow. The window was too small. He barked once, soft, urgent. "They'll catch you," Emily sobbed. "Please!" Another bark, firmer. Then he turned toward the shouts echoing down the corridor. He was going to buy her time. Emily ran. She didn't look back. She didn't stop until she saw headlights. A car pulling off the road. A woman in a lab coat stepped out, clutching a medical bag. "Dr. Ava Morgan," the woman said. "I'm here to help." Emily blinked. "You're the vet. Mommy used to know you." "That's right, sweetheart." "You're safe now," Dr. Morgan smiled gently. Then Emily smelled it. The same cologne. She froze. "You smell like them." "What did you say?" the woman asked, eyes narrowing. "You're one of them." Back in the bunker, Shadow faced 2 more men. Bleeding. Torn. Breathing ragged. But standing. Because that's what Rachel had trained him to do. Because that's what Emily needed him to be. Because when everything else had fallen apart, he was still standing. Emily froze. The air felt heavier than it should. Wet grass clung to her bare feet, her knees were scraped, and her breath came in short, panicked bursts. But it wasn't the cold that made her tremble. It was the smell, that cologne, sharp. Chemical, sweet in the wrong way. She'd smelled it the night her mother died. She'd smelled it in the bunker. And now, it was coming from Dr. Ava Morgan. The local vet, a woman her mother once trusted. "You smell like them," Emily whispered. A flicker of confusion crossed the woman's face just for a second before her eyes went flat and empty. "What did you just say?" "You're one of them," Emily said, her voice shaking. Ava took a slow step forward. "Sweetheart, you're scared. You've been through something terrible. Let me help." "Stay away." Emily turned to run. But headlights suddenly cut through the trees. Doors slammed. "Emily!" The voice she had waited days to hear broke through the darkness like thunder. Jack Callahan. He came sprinting out of the trees, soaked to the bone, boots slipping in the mud, eyes wide with fear and fire. Behind him, Agent Grace Howard emerged with 2 armed FBI agents, weapons drawn, flashlights sweeping the clearing. Emily cried out, "Hunter's still inside! They're going to hurt him!" Grace didn't hesitate. She raised her sidearm and pointed it directly at Ava Morgan. "Hands in the air, now!" But it was too late. Ava had already reached into her bag. And then the trees exploded, not with gunfire, but with fur, fury, and a low, guttural snarl that shook the earth. Shadow crashed through the clearing like a meteor. His body was shredded, blood soaked his coat. One eye was nearly swollen shut, but he moved like vengeance given form. He hit Ava hard, knocking her backward, the syringe flying from her hand and landing in the grass. She hit the dirt with a gasp. The wind knocked from her lungs. Shadow stood over her, teeth bared, chest heaving. He was done playing. Later that night, the raid began. The FBI swarmed Devil's Backbone. Tactical teams swept through the forest, clearing the bunker and every tunnel connected to it. They found more than they expected: cages, documents, hard drives, and inside a locked room, a map of cities stretching across the East Coast, marked with red pins. Each one a drop point. It was bigger than anyone imagined. And Charles Whitmore, philanthropist, youth center founder, community hero, was gone, vanished. Back in town, Emily and Shadow were rushed to the hospital. Emily had minor scrapes and bruises. Shadow, he was hanging on by a thread. His breathing was ragged, his heartbeat erratic. He was barely conscious. Jack sat in the waiting room, his hands stained with blood, none of it his. Emily curled beside him on the bench, wrapped in a blanket, her tiny body trembling with exhaustion. Every few minutes, she stirred and whispered, "Is he okay?" Jack would nod, even when he didn't know. "He's fighting, just like always." In the back of the veterinary wing, Dr. Whitaker worked tirelessly. Lung damage, internal bleeding, torn muscle. Massive blood loss. Any other dog would have given up hours ago, but not Shadow. "He's not just surviving," the doctor murmured. "He's choosing to." Hours later, Emily sat at his side, stroking the fur on his ear. She whispered to him, "You knew." Jack stood nearby, arms folded, eyes wet. "Knew what?" he asked softly. Emily looked up at him. "The man who took me. He smelled like the man from the night Mommy died." Jack's face went still. "And Dr. Morgan," Emily continued. "She wore the same cologne." Jack's stomach dropped. That scent. That damn scent that haunted his nightmares. "Whitmore," he muttered. "He was there." The night Rachel was killed. Shadow's ears twitched, even in unconsciousness. He had smelled it too, from the beginning, and he never forgot. Later, Grace walked into the hospital room, her arm in a sling, her voice low. "Jack," she said, "I need to speak with you, privately." Jack looked to Emily. A nurse stepped in, nodding. "She'll stay with her." Out in the hallway, Grace didn't sugarcoat it. "It's bigger than we thought. Whitmore's been running this ring for years up and down the East Coast. He used his youth programs to identify and groom kids." Jack swallowed hard. "My wife," his voice cracked. "She figured it out." "She was building a case," Grace said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "She wasn't just in the wrong place at the wrong time. She was the only one close enough to bring it down." Jack stared at the wall. All this time, he'd thought Rachel had died randomly, senselessly. But it wasn't random. She died fighting for truth. That night, Jack sat by Shadow's bed, whispering, "You were trying to protect her that night. I know that now." Shadow didn't move, but his heart monitor beeped, steady and strong. Jack laid a hand on his side. "You never gave up, even when I did." The next morning, Grace came in with new intel. "Security footage from the station," she said. "Something's off with Shadow's collar. It's thicker than standard." They retrieved it from evidence storage. A forensic tech cut it open carefully. Inside was a small waterproof capsule, a micro SD card. Grace stared at it like it was made of gold. Jackpot. They rushed it to a secure lab. Inside, photographs, financial records, voice recordings. Evidence Rachel had gathered in secret, some of it dated just days before her death. That afternoon, Emily asked to take a short walk. Jack helped her out of bed. Shadow, still bandaged, insisted on joining them. He walked slowly, carefully, but with purpose. He's looking for something, Emily said, watching his ears twitch. Jack narrowed his eyes. He's scanning. Mom used to say he could find treasure, Emily whispered. Jack stopped in his tracks. Emily, did your mom ever hide anything in the pond? She blinked. I don't know, but Shadow would. Back at the farmhouse, the pond sat still. Jack stood at the edge, looking down at the murky water. Shadow stepped forward, ears up, body tense. Grace crouched nearby. You really think there's something in there? Jack nodded. If Rachel hid it, it's big, and it's everything. He knelt beside Shadow. Okay, boy, he whispered. This is the last thing she asked of you. Shadow looked him dead in the eyes, then dove. The pond behind the old Callahan farmhouse wasn't much to look at. It sat still beneath a grey sky, surrounded by weeds and cattails. A broken bench leaned to one side like it had given up years ago. Nothing about the place screamed important, but Shadow stood at the edge like it mattered more than anything else. He sniffed the air, took one slow step forward, then another. His bandages were still damp from his last surgery. Every breath was effort. But when Jack whispered, "Find the treasure, boy," Shadow didn't hesitate. He stepped into the water. Beside him, Agent Grace Howard crouched, watching. You really think there's something in there? She asked. Jack nodded. Rachel used to train him here. Hide things under rocks, boxes, files. Told him to find them. And you think she hid evidence? Jack's voice cracked. If she did, it's all we've got left. In the truck nearby, Emily pressed her face to the window, watching Shadow's every move. Come on, buddy, she whispered. You can do it. Dr. Whitaker sat beside her in the passenger seat, wringing his hands. He's not ready for this, the vet murmured. He's barely healed. His lungs. He doesn't care, Emily said quietly. He promised Mom. Shadow swam toward the center of the pond. He paused, ears flicking, then dove. The water rippled. Seconds passed, then a minute. Jack's fists clenched. Come on, Shadow. The surface broke. Shadow re-emerged, paddling with something clutched in his mouth. Jack waded in waist-deep to meet him. It was a waterproof plastic case, about the size of a lunchbox, covered in mud and algae. Shadow didn't stop. He dove again. And again. By the time he staggered from the pond, he had retrieved 5 identical cases, then collapsed at Jack's feet. Grace called in her tech team immediately. They worked under tents by the barn, opening each case with gloved hands and steady breath. Inside the first one, photographs of children, all marked with dates and locations. Handwritten notes in Rachel's familiar looping cursive, financial documents tied to offshore accounts and non-profit front groups, and one small voice recorder labeled, "If I don't make it, play this." Jack knew the handwriting. He sat on the porch steps, holding the recorder like it might burn him. Then he pressed play. Rachel's voice filled the quiet. Jack, if you're hearing this, I'm gone, and I'm sorry. I thought I had more time, but I knew this day might come. I found something. Something big. Whitmore's Charities youth program. She's using them to find vulnerable kids, groom them. Move them. I couldn't tell you. Not because I didn't trust you, but because I knew you'd try to stop me, and I couldn't stop, so I trained Shadow. I trained him to protect Emily. I trained him to carry the truth when I couldn't. Jack stared out over the pond, eyes burning. She had known. She had planned everything, even her death. Later that night, back at the hospital, Jack sat by Shadow's recovery crate. The dog was weak, barely responsive, but when Emily entered the room, he opened one eye. Hi, buddy, she whispered, curling beside him. You found the treasure, just like she said you would. Jack sat on the floor next to them, his voice thick. She trusted you more than anyone. Emily nodded. Even more than you. Jack didn't argue. He just smiled softly. She was usually right. The next morning, Grace arrived with news. Rachel's evidence. It's enough, she said. We can indict Whitmore. We can expose the whole operation. Jack said nothing. He was staring at Shadow, whose chest now rose and fell a little stronger. The war wasn't over yet. But they were finally winning. The farmhouse was finally quiet. For the first time in weeks, Jack felt something close to peace. Emily had fallen asleep curled up beside Shadow, one hand resting on the dog's side like it belonged there. Outside, wind rustled the trees, but the storm, the real one, felt like it had passed. Inside the living room, Jack stared at a folded letter from Rachel. Her last words, discovered just days before, her handwriting still soft, still real. You're stronger than you think, Jack. Keep her safe and trust the dog. Even when you can't trust yourself. Jack pressed the letter to his chest. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But for tonight, they were okay. At 3:07 a.m., glass shattered in the kitchen. Jack's eyes snapped open. Shadow's head shot up, ears pointed, a low growl rumbling from his chest. Jack didn't need to ask. He grabbed Emily, rolled them both off the couch, and pressed her behind the armchair. Stay down, he whispered. She nodded silently. They had practiced this. Footsteps creaked on the porch, slow, deliberate. Shadow crept forward, body tense, every muscle alive. Jack reached for his phone. No signal. The power was cut. And then... The front door swung open. Framed by the moonlight stood Charles Whitmore. Alive, free, and holding a gun. Hello, Jack, he said casually. Hope I didn't wake you. Jack's heart pounded. You're supposed to be in custody. Whitmore smiled, stepping into the room like he owned it. Money buys many things, he said. Silence, influence. Sometimes, freedom. Behind him stood Dr. Ava Morgan, pale, trembling, still clutching her vet bag like a shield. Jack rose slowly, putting himself between them and the couch. You're not taking her. I don't want the girl, Whitmore said. I want what Rachel left behind, the physical evidence. You're too late. The FBI has it. Not all of it, Whitmore snapped. She kept backups, and I think you know where. You're wrong. I don't think I am. From behind the armchair, a small voice said, Daddy? Whitmore's face lit up. You should have kept her hidden. He raised the gun, but before he could pull the trigger, Shadow moved. One moment he was by the fireplace, the next airborne. A blur of fury and instinct, the gun went off. The shot missed. Shadow slammed into Whitmore, knocking him backward into the wall. Ava screamed, dropping to her knees, blood spreading across her coat. Jack lunged for the gun, but Whitmore got to it first. They struggled. Fists. Elbows. Years of rage behind every strike, and then... Shadow leapt again. Despite reopened wounds, he locked his jaws around Whitmore's wrist, just as the gun fired. The bullet hit the ceiling. Blood sprayed. Shadow collapsed. No! Emily screamed. Jack tackled Whitmore, punching him hard. Then again, and again, until the man stopped moving. Until the room went still. Only now the silence wasn't peaceful. It was full of dread. Jack turned to Shadow. The dog was lying still, blood soaking through the bandages. Shadow! Emily crawled to his side. Please wake up, she sobbed. Jack dropped beside them, checking for breath. He was breathing, but barely. You did good, boy, Jack whispered. You saved us. Again. Shadow's tail thumped once. Then went still. Sirens howled in the distance, too late. FBI agents stormed the house. Paramedics rushed in. Ava Morgan, alive but unconscious, was stabilized. Whitmore, bleeding and cuffed, was dragged to a waiting van, but all Jack could see was the dog on the floor. We need a medevac now, Grace shouted into her radio. Animal trauma, Richmond, priority 1. He's not stable enough to move, a medic muttered. Then, from the corner of the room, Emily stood. Tears streaked her face, but her voice was steady. Yes, he is. Everyone turned. Emily looked straight at the medic. He's not dying, he's hiding. Grace crouched beside her. What did you say? He's playing dead, Emily said. Just like Mom taught him, he's waiting for it to be safe. Jack met her eyes. She was right. An hour later, a helicopter landed in the pasture. Shadow was lifted onto a gurney, IVs in both legs, blood pressure hanging by a thread. Emily climbed in beside him. She took his paw in both hands, whispered, You kept your promise. Now let me keep mine. The Richmond Veterinary Trauma Center had prepped for emergencies before, but never like this. The team was waiting as the medevac landed. Inside, a battered German shepherd lay on a stretcher, wrapped in soaked bandages, barely breathing. Beside him, an 8-year-old girl refused to let go of his paw. His name is Shadow, she told them. He saved me. He saved my daddy too. No one dared tell her how slim the chances were. They just took him in and started fighting. Inside the operating room, the lead surgeon barked orders like a battlefield commander. Multiple wounds, internal bleeding. One lung partially collapsed. He's in shock. Can he make it? One nurse asked. The doctor paused. If he wasn't the dog he is, I'd say no. Back in the waiting room, Jack Callahan paced like a caged animal. He couldn't sit, couldn't pray, could barely breathe. Emily sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, eyes locked on the swinging doors. She didn't speak. Didn't cry, just waited and waited. At 3:42 a.m., the surgeon stepped out, gloves off, face drawn. He made it through surgery, he said. He's alive. Jack felt the air rush back into his lungs. Emily jumped to her feet. Can we see him? Just for a minute. They found Shadow lying in a recovery kennel, hooked up to oxygen, his breathing shallow but steady. Emily knelt beside him. Hi, buddy, she whispered. We're okay now. You did it. Shadow opened one eye, let out a soft, breathy whine. Jack stood behind her, his voice barely above a whisper. You brought her home. You brought all of us home. 2 days later, when Shadow stood on his own for the first time, the entire staff applauded. His legs shook, his tail wagged once, but he stood. Emily cried, not out of fear this time, but out of awe. Meanwhile, the truth Rachel had fought to protect was making waves far beyond their small world. The evidence found in the pond, along with the recordings, documents, and files from Shadow's collar, had blown open Charles Whitmore's empire. Dozens of arrests followed. Youth centers across the East Coast were shut down. Children were rescued. Survivors were reunited with families. Rachel Callahan's name made national headlines. So did Shadow's. They called him the miracle dog, the four-legged witness, the hero who wouldn't give up. But for Jack and Emily, he wasn't a symbol. He was family. 1 week later, Jack took Emily and Shadow back to the farmhouse. The smell of smoke and blood had faded. What remained was memory and new beginnings. That evening, Jack opened the last of the waterproof cases they'd recovered from the pond. Inside was a sealed envelope addressed in Rachel's handwriting, for Jack, and a small flash drive. His hands trembled as he opened the letter. Jack, if you're reading this, something has happened to me. But I need you to know. I did everything I could to protect you and Emily. I trained Shadow for this. Not just as a protector, but as a guide, a courier, a soldier. But most of all, he's family. Please trust him, even when you can't trust yourself. You're stronger than you believe. Love her, love yourself. And when the time comes, bury them with the truth. Rachel. Jack didn't realize he was crying until Emily reached over and took his hand. She really planned everything, Emily whispered. Jack nodded. She didn't just leave evidence, she left instructions. That night, Shadow lay curled at the foot of Emily's bed, where he belonged. Jack stood in the doorway, watching them both sleep. He wasn't haunted anymore, just grateful and alive. 1 year later, the Callahan farmhouse looked different. Not because of the new paint on the porch or the vegetable garden Jack and Emily had planted together. Not because the rotting bench by the pond had been replaced with one carved by hand. It was the air that had changed. Lighter. Like the grief had finally started to lift, one breath at a time. Today wasn't just any day. It was Shadow's retirement ceremony. The town firehouse had never seen such a crowd. Rows of folding chairs filled the room. Local kids held signs that read, "Thank you, Shadow." Reporters stood quietly near the back. Even a few FBI agents had come from out of town. Jack adjusted his tie awkwardly at the podium. Beside him, Emily stood proudly holding Shadow's leash. The German shepherd, now fully recovered, sat alert, chest puffed out, tail gently swaying. He wore a new vest, black, clean, embroidered in gold thread. Retired, still a hero. Jack cleared his throat. Folks, I'm not a man of many speeches, but today I've got to try. The room fell silent. A year ago I was broken, lost, grieving. I'd given up. He paused, his voice thick. And then a dog, just a dog, people said, refused to give up on me. There were a few sniffles in the crowd. Jack looked down at Shadow. He saved my daughter. He saved me. But more than that, he gave us something we thought we'd lost. He reached into a small wooden box and pulled out a new collar tag. Simple. Brass. Engraved with the words, "Always faithful, forever family." He clipped it to Shadow's collar. "Welcome to retirement, buddy." The crowd erupted in applause. Shadow didn't bark. He didn't move. He just leaned his body into Jack's legs and let out a soft sigh. Like he knew it was finally okay to rest. Later that evening, they returned home for a quiet celebration. No cameras. Just cupcakes, old friends, and laughter, something that had been rare for far too long. Grace Howard stopped by before heading off to a new field office in Seattle. She sipped iced tea on the porch swing while watching Emily show her homemade storybook to 2 other kids. "You ever think about writing it all down?" she asked Jack. He nodded toward his daughter. "I don't need to," he said. "She already is." That night, after everyone had gone, Jack sat alone by the pond. Shadow lay at his feet, head resting on Jack's boot. Fireflies danced across the water. Jack pulled out a letterone he'd written that morning. He unfolded it slowly. "Rachel, you told me once that grief either hardens a person or cracks them open. For a while, I let it harden me. I pushed everyone away. But you gave me a way back. Through your words. Through Emily. Through him. I wish you could see her now, brave, funny, so much like you. We're okay. I know that now. Thank you for never giving up on us. I'll carry you always. Jack." He folded the letter and dropped it into the pond. Watched it float briefly, then slowly sink, like a promise being delivered to the woman who lit the path they had finally followed. The next morning, Jack found Emily on the back steps. She was barefoot, holding a cup of hot chocolate, staring at the water. Shadow sat beside her, his tail sweeping the porch lazily. "Thinking?" Jack asked. She nodded. "Do you think Mom knew she was going to die?" Jack sat beside her. "I think she knew the danger, but I think she hoped she'd stop it in time." Emily was quiet for a while. Then she said, "She didn't just leave behind evidence." Jack turned toward her. "She left behind instructions for Shadow, for us." She trusted him more than anyone. Jack smiled softly. She was usually right. That Sunday they visited Rachel's grave. There were fresh flowers already there, left by strangers. Emily added her own, a bundle of wild daisies wrapped in ribbon. They stood in silence for a long moment. Then Jack knelt. "I used to come here full of guilt," he said. "I blamed myself. I blamed Shadow. But Emily, and he brought me back." Emily stood beside him and rested her hand on his shoulder. Jack whispered, "She already knows you were brave, Rachel. But now she'll know you were also brilliant. And kind and funny and real." Shadow sat between them. Silent but solid, the three of them still here. Still standing. Back at home, the wind whispered through the trees behind the farmhouse. It was peaceful now. Emily sat at the kitchen table, her legs swinging beneath the chair. In her hands was a worn leather-bound notebook. She handed it to Jack. "What's this?" he asked gently. She smiled. "My story," she said. "I'm writing it all down, for other kids, so they know they're not alone." Jack opened the first page. In careful handwriting, it read, "My name is Emily Callahan. I was taken, but I was never truly lost, because someone always believed in me, because a dog named Shadow never stopped looking, and because my mom left behind a map. This is our story." Jack blinked away the sting behind his eyes. "You're brave," he said. Emily shrugged. She was braver. "I'm just trying to catch up." A week later, the farmhouse was filled with laughter. Not the kind that covers pain, but the real kind, the kind that grows in the cracks of healing. The kitchen smelled like pancakes and syrup. Shadow sat near the stove, his new favorite spot, tail thumping softly against the floor every time Jack flipped another stack. Emily ran in from outside, cheeks red from the cold. "Dad, he's sunbathing again." Jack peeked out the window. Shadow had claimed the back porch stretched long in the morning light, head resting between his paws. He looked older now, but peaceful, like he knew his work was done. That spring, they planted sunflowers. In the fall, they built a fence and adopted a new pupa-goofy lab mix named Cody, who chewed on everything and followed Shadow like a kid follows a superhero. Shadow tolerated it. Barely. But every now and then, Jack would catch him nudging the little dog forward, as if training the next guardian for the family he loved. On the anniversary of Rachel's passing, they held a quiet ceremony by the pond. No speeches, no tears, just music. Candles and stories. Emily read from her journal. "My mom used to say love isn't something you lose. It's something you grow into. At first I didn't understand that. But now I do, because every time I look at Shadow, I see her love. Every time I laugh with my dad, I feel it. Love doesn't die. It just changes shape." Jack placed a small carved statue beside the bench, a German shepherd with angel wings. Below it, a brass plaque. Rachel Callahan, mother. Wife, warrior. She lit the path. We followed the light. Emily knelt beside it. "I miss you, Mummy," she whispered. Then she looked at Shadow. "He says hi." That night, under a sky full of stars, Jack and Emily sat on the porch. Cody chased fireflies in the grass. Shadow watched from the steps, eyes half closed, tail swaying. "Do you think Mom's proud of us?" Emily asked softly. Jack looked at her, then at the dog who had brought them back to life. "I think she never stopped being proud." Emily smiled. "And do you think Shadow knows he's a hero?" Jack leaned down, scratched behind the dog's ears. "I think he knows he's loved. And maybe that's even better." And so this story ends not with a farewell but with a beginning. Because healing doesn't happen all at once. It comes in moments, in quiet mornings, in second chances, in muddy paws and loyal eyes, in letters left behind, and in the unshakable bond between a little girl, a broken father, and a dog who never stopped believing. In a world that often feels uncertain, hope doesn't always arrive the way we expect. Sometimes it comes in the form of a battered dog, a brave little girl, or a grieving father learning to love again. The story of Jack, Emily, and Shadow is more than a tale of rescue. It's a reminder that love, loyalty, and forgiveness can heal even the deepest wounds. For older American audiences, this message strikes home. We're never too old to be saved, to love again, or to bring light into someone else's life. Time may take many things from us, but kindness, whether from a loyal animal or a quiet act of courage, still holds the power to rebuild families and restore faith. If there's one truth to carry forward, it's this: we don't survive alone. And sometimes the souls we think are lost are the very ones leading us home,